My name's Martha, I'm 62, and last winter my daughter told me I was taking up too much space in her life. Not metaphorically, literally. I was standing in the middle of her Brooklyn loft holding a box of my books when she looked me dead in the eye and said, "Mom, this isn't a retirement home. You're slowing down my energy." She meant it. Every word. I'd sold my house after my husband died. 40 years of memories packed into boxes. And moved in with her for what I thought was temporary, just until I figured out my next step. But I wasn't transitioning. I was apparently obstructing her entrepreneurial flow. Lena's 35, founder of a wellness tech startup that makes meditation apps for stressed-out professionals. She's smart, driven, beautiful in that polished, Instagrammable way that makes people think she has it all together. And maybe she does. Except what she doesn't have, apparently, is room in her life for a mother who raised her on single paychecks and sacrifice. I thought I was helping her, covering bills when her funding fell through, grocery shopping, making sure she ate something besides kale chips. But somewhere along the line, my presence went from support to inconvenience. It started small. She asked me to move my knitting stuff into the hall closet because it cluttered the vibe. Then she said my books gave the loft too much intellectual heaviness. I laughed it off, told myself she was just stressed. Startups are hard. But last Tuesday, she and Jared, her boyfriend and business partner, sat me down at the kitchen island and hit me with their latest pitch. Not for the company, for my retirement savings. "Think about it, Mom," Jared said, swirling his green smoothie like a TED Talk reject. $100,000 from your nest egg now could turn into $1 million when we go public. It's a win-win. Lena smiled like she was offering me a chance to buy happiness. "Don't you want to be part of something bigger than your pension?" I didn't say anything for a long minute. I just stared at them. These two people who spoke in buzzwords and stock options, like family meant equity shares. Then I said, as calmly as I could, "No." That's when it happened. Lena's face changed. Cold, flat, like a switch flipped. "Well," she said, standing up and brushing non-existent lint from her $900 linen jumpsuit. "Then I guess it's time for you to find somewhere else to stay. I need the space for my creative team." Just like that. No discussion, no compromise. She called me an Uber while I was still trying to process the words. Jared had the nerve to hand me a list of short-term rentals in Queens. Like I was some broke college student couch surfing between internships. I packed my things in 2 hours. It's funny, the things you reach for when you're panicking. My late husband's watch. A photo of Lena when she was 8, grinning with 2 missing teeth. My knitting needles. I left the books. I couldn't carry them and my pride at the same time. When the Uber driver asked where I was going, I gave him the address of a tiny studio I'd looked at months ago, but couldn't bring myself to rent because I was afraid of feeling alone. I wasn't afraid anymore. The studio was dusty, with creaky pipes and a view of an alleyway dumpster, but it was mine. I spent the first night sitting on the floor eating takeout lo mein and wondering when exactly my daughter stopped seeing me as her mother and started seeing me as an obstacle. The next morning, I did what I always do when I don't know what to do. I walked. Through the neighborhood, down streets where nobody knew my name, until I found myself outside a little coffee shop with a crooked sign and a warm smell of cinnamon rolls. And there, at the corner table, was Tom. Tom Miller. The man I hadn't seen in 20 years. The man who, the last time we spoke, said, "You ever need anything, you call me. I don't care if it's been decades." Turns out it had been decades, and I needed something. What I didn't know as I sat down across from him was that Tom wasn't just an old friend. He was also the angel investor my daughter had been desperately chasing for the past 6 months. And in about 5 minutes, my entire story was going to take a turn I never saw coming. I sat across from Tom in that little cafe, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of black coffee, feeling like I'd been dropped into someone else's life. I hadn't planned to tell him everything. Honestly, I hadn't planned anything. But something about his steady gaze, the way he listened without interrupting, without pity, made the words tumble out faster than I could catch them. I told him about Lena, About the startup, the loft, the $100,000 investment pitch, and the eviction that followed when I said no. I tried to soften it at first, still protecting her in some twisted motherly instinct. But halfway through, I stopped sugarcoating. She hadn't just asked for help. She'd demanded a sacrifice. Then tossed me out when I wouldn't bleed for her dream. Tom didn't flinch. Didn't offer the usual platitudes about how kids get selfish sometimes or how maybe she was just stressed. He just nodded, slow and deliberate, and said, "Sounds like she's got herself wrapped up with a partner who taught her how to see people as resources, not relationships." That hit harder than I expected. I hadn't even mentioned Jared yet. But Tom knew. Of course he did. Men like Jared are a dime a dozen in the startup world. All charisma and confidence until they smell weakness. Then it's leverage and liability. The bell above the door jingled as the morning rush picked up. People in puffer jackets and wireless earbuds, chasing deadlines and lattes. I sat there feeling invisible, like a ghost watching a world that had moved on without me. "You know what's funny?" Tom said, breaking the quiet between us. "I've been hearing about this wellness tech startup trying to pitch investors up and down Brooklyn. Real aggressive. Young female founder, real sharp, but a little reckless. Keeps name-dropping people she doesn't actually know." I felt my stomach drop. "Calls herself Lena Chase," Tom continued. "But nobody's biting because her numbers don't add up. And the market's already saturated with companies selling mindfulness to people too busy to notice they're being scammed." That was my daughter, selling serenity while burning bridges. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Instead, I took a long sip of bitter coffee and said, "So what are you going to do when she pitches to you?" Tom smiled, slow and thoughtful. "I might take the meeting. People show you who they really are when they think you have something they want." I should have been angry, should have told him to leave her alone. But instead, I felt something else rise in my chest. Not revenge exactly. Just this quiet, steady knowing that maybe, for once, Lena was about to meet someone who wouldn't play by her script. That afternoon, I went back to my little studio and, for the first time in weeks, opened my laptop without dread. I spent hours reading about angel investing, startup ethics, financial red flags. I wasn't going to be caught off guard again. If Lena wanted to turn life into a business deal, fine. But I was going to learn the terms of engagement. A week later, Tom called. "She pitched me today," he said, voice calm but edged with something sharper. "Brought Jared along. They laid out the whole plan. High growth, scalable platforms, market disruption. Jared did most of the talking." Of course he did. "And?" I asked, heart thudding so loud I could barely hear myself. Tom paused. I could picture him leaning back in his office chair, hands steepled under his chin, the way he always did when he was about to drop a bomb. And I told them I'd consider it, but only if they agreed to bring on an advisory board to oversee spending. Someone with financial and personal stake in the company's success. Someone who knows what real sustainability looks like. I froze. "Martha," Tom said softly, "I named you as the advisory chair." For a second, I couldn't breathe. "What did Lena say?" I whispered. Tom's laugh was quiet, almost sad. "She smiled that polished smile of hers and said she'd think about it. But Jared lost it. He slammed his laptop shut and told her she'd be a fool to let an old woman with no business experience control their money." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of it all settle on my shoulders. And then Tom added, almost as an afterthought, "Oh, and by the way, you're on the invite list for their next investor roundtable. It's next Friday." I opened my eyes, staring at the cracked ceiling of my apartment. Next Friday, where my daughter would either accept me as part of her company's future or try to erase me completely. And something told me she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. Friday came faster than I was ready for. I spent the whole morning pacing my tiny studio, rehearsing what I'd say if Lena gave me a chance to speak. What I'd do if she didn't. Somewhere between my third cup of coffee and my second mental breakdown, I realized something terrifying. I didn't know what outcome I was hoping for. Reconciliation, power, closure. Maybe a little of all three. The investor roundtable was held in one of those glass-walled co-working spaces downtown. Cold lighting, brushed concrete floors, exposed ductwork. A place designed to look cutting-edge but felt as sterile as a hospital waiting room. I stepped off the elevator and instantly felt out of place in my thrift store cardigan and worn leather flats. Lena was across the room, surrounded by sleek people in tailored suits. Jared stood beside her, his arm resting on the back of her chair like she was a trophy he'd just won. For a moment, I almost turned around and left. Almost. But then Lena spotted me. And in her eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen since she was a teenager sneaking out past curfew. Fear. Just for a second, before she smoothed it over with that perfect CEO smile. "Mom," she called, her voice sharp enough to slice the air. "Glad you could join us." Heads turned. Whispers started. A few investors looked at me like I was the janitor who'd wandered into the wrong meeting. Tom was there too, seated quietly at the far end of the table, watching the whole thing play out like a chess match he already knew the outcome of. I took my seat beside him, heart pounding like a drumline. Jared stood to open the meeting. He launched into their pitch. Revenue projections, market analysis, buzzwords stacked on top of buzzwords. It was all polish and no substance. And when he got to the part about bringing in a trusted family advisor to strengthen our leadership team, he gestured toward me like I was some kind of mascot. "Of course, we're still finalizing the terms of her role," Jared added smoothly, "but we value Martha's wisdom." I felt heat rise in my chest. He didn't value me. He tolerated me, as long as I stayed quiet. When they opened the floor to questions, Tom leaned forward, voice calm but loaded. "Martha, would you care to share your thoughts on their financial transparency?" Every head in the room turned. I cleared my throat, fingers trembling slightly. "Well," I said, steadying my voice, "I've had the chance to review their financials. What concerns me most isn't what's in them. It's what's missing." The room froze. Jared's been funneling company funds into a side LLC registered under his name. I found it in the Delaware corporate filings last night. Gasps. Phones came out. People started Googling. Lena shot out of her seat, face pale as paper. "Mom, stop. You don't know what you're talking about." But I did, and the documents were right there in my bag. Tom stayed silent, letting me hold the room. "You trusted the wrong person," I told her softly, heartbreak cutting deeper than anger ever could. "And now you've put everything at risk." Jared was already gathering his laptop, muttering something about a misunderstanding, but the damage was done. Several investors stood up, shaking their heads, walking away without a word. The meeting dissolved into chaos. I grabbed my coat, ready to leave this disaster behind. But as I turned, Lena grabbed my arm. Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice was still sharp as glass. "Why would you humiliate me like this? In front of everyone?" I looked at her. Really looked at her. And for the first time, I didn't see my little girl. I saw a woman who had been warned and chose to ignore it. "Because sometimes," I said quietly, "the only way to save someone is to let them fall." And just when I thought that was the end of it, Tom tapped my shoulder. "There's something else you should know," he said, his voice low. He handed me his phone. On the screen was an email from a rival startup. Subject line: "Interested in bringing Martha McNeil on board as an executive advisor. Competitive equity offer attached." My breath caught in my throat. While Lena's company burned, someone else had been watching me. And they saw my worth. I looked up at Tom, stunned. He smiled, gentle but firm. "Your story's not over yet, Martha. Not even close." I walked out of that glass-walled room feeling like my chest had been cracked open and emptied out. Part of me thought I'd feel triumphant. Instead, I just felt tired. You don't spend 35 years raising a daughter only to destroy her company in front of strangers, even if she gave you no choice. Tom caught up to me in the lobby. His voice was quiet but steady. That rival startup? They want you to advise on their new product launch. Big offer. Leadership position. Not just charity. I didn't answer right away. I stared out at the Brooklyn skyline, all steel and light and cold winter air, and wondered how the hell I'd gotten here. I used to be someone's mom, someone's wife. Now I was… what? A cautionary tale? A comeback story? You don't have to decide today, Tom added gently. But Martha, maybe it's time to build something that's yours. That night in my drafty studio, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Lena's face when I exposed Jared's scheme. Shock, yes, but also betrayal. And that broke something in me, because no matter how this started, she really believed I'd ruined her life out of spite. The next morning, my phone rang at 6:42 a.m. Mom, Lena's voice was raw. I need to see you. I met her at a diner on Atlantic Avenue. Same place I used to take her after dance recitals when she was small enough to sit beside me and steal fries off my plate. But the woman sitting across from me now was nothing like that little girl. She was shaking. No makeup, hair pulled back, hoodie swallowing her thin frame. They froze our accounts. She whispered, the board is calling an emergency meeting to vote Jared out, and they're looking at me like I should have known. I didn't say anything, just let the silence hang between us. Tom pulled his investment. She added, voice cracking. He said the company's leadership lacks integrity. Do you know how humiliating that is? I did. She wiped her eyes, hands trembling. I'm broke, Mom. I have nothing left. And then she looked up and there it was. That old spark. The manipulation dressed up as vulnerability. But you could fix this, she whispered. You could loan me what you offered for the wedding. $50,000, just until I rebuild. I let out a slow breath. So that's what this was. Lena, I said quietly, I won't bankroll your next mistake. You wanted to run your life without me. This is what that looks like. She slammed her hands on the table, drawing stares from the other booths. You think this is revenge, don't you? You're punishing me for not being your little girl anymore. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not pity, just clarity. No, I said. I'm finally loving myself enough to stop rescuing people who don't want to be saved. She sat back, stunned, silent. I slid a folded piece of paper across the table. What's this? She demanded. An introduction, I said, to a business coach who helps founders rebuild after a collapse. She's tough. No loans, no handouts. But she might teach you what I couldn't. Lena didn't pick it up. She just stared at me like I'd betrayed her all over again. I stood to leave. And just as I turned to go, she hissed, low and bitter. You think you've won, but Jared's already got another startup lined up. He's pitching your rival next week. He'll take everything you built with him. I froze. What did you say? She smirked, cold and sharp. Tom's company. Jared's meeting them Tuesday. He's selling them a copy of your entire advisory plan. You think you're so clever, Mom, but you're just another mark in his playbook. My blood ran cold. For months, I thought I'd been 2 steps ahead. Turns out Jared had been playing a whole different game. And next week, everything I thought I'd protected might be stolen right out from under me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window of my little studio, watching the city lights flicker against the glass, replaying every conversation I'd had with Tom, every document I'd signed, every warning I'd ignored. Jared was going to steal my entire advisory framework. My research, my connections, everything I'd worked for since the day Lena threw me out of her loft. And he was going to pitch it like it was his genius all along. But here's the thing. People like Jared are always so sure they're the smartest person in the room, they forget the quiet ones are still listening. The next morning, I called Tom, told him everything Lena said. At first, he was quiet. Then I heard him exhale a slow, tired laugh. Martha, he said, I've been in this game too long to leave the doors unlocked. Turns out Tom had quietly filed for provisional patents on the business model 2 weeks earlier. Not because he didn't trust me, but because he didn't trust the world we live in. But we weren't done. Jared was pitching to Tom's rival firm on Tuesday. If they bought into his lie, it wouldn't matter who held the patent. The narrative would be his, and people follow the story before they check the facts. So Tom and I did what people like us do best. We prepared. Tuesday afternoon, I walked into that pitch meeting uninvited. No fanfare, no announcement. Just me, a thick manila folder under one arm and the calm certainty of someone who'd been underestimated too many times. Jared was mid-slide, gesturing to a sleek presentation filled with buzzwords and recycled promises. The investors ate it up, nodding along until one of them noticed me standing at the back of the room. "Excuse me, sir," I said, my voice clear but calm. "But I believe you're presenting proprietary material owned by McNeil Advisory Group." Jared froze. Color drained from his face like someone pulled the plug. I walked to the front, opened the folder, and laid out copies of the provisional patents. Timestamps from months before Jared ever showed his face in our meetings. Emails from me to Tom, laying out the very strategies Jared was claiming as his own. Legal documentation, airtight and undeniable. For a long moment, the room was silent. Then one of the investors cleared his throat. "Mr. Hayes," he said, not bothering to hide his disdain, "would you care to explain how you came into possession of these materials?" Jared stammered, his usual charm falling flat against the cold, clinical reality of fraud. He tried to spin it, of course. Claimed he and I had been partners, that I'd offered him full rights in exchange for mentorship. I let him spin. Then I played the voicemail. The one where Jared, drunk and arrogant, bragged about how easy it was to steal ideas from a washed-up old woman who didn't know how the tech world worked. That was the end of it. Security escorted Jared out of the building. The investors shredded his proposal on the spot. Tom and I finalized the deal later that afternoon. Our advisory framework would launch under a new name. Mine. As for Lena, I wish I could tell you we hugged it out and baked cookies like some bad sitcom. But life doesn't tie itself up in neat little bows. She called that night. Cried, cursed, apologized, begged. But I told her the truth. Until you learn to build something without breaking people, you'll keep losing everything you touch. She hung up. I haven't heard from her since. But I hope someday when the noise quiets and the dust settles, she'll remember who taught her to stand in the first place. The funny thing is, I never set out for revenge. I set out to protect myself. But somewhere along the way, I learned the most dangerous person in the room is the one who knows their worth and no longer asks for permission to exist. If this story hit close to home for you, tell me about it in the comments. Maybe your story's different. Maybe it's the same in ways we wish it weren't. And if you want to stick around for the next chapter, you know where to find me.